Hello.
Nero, the gruff, tough-as-nails, blue-collar Romulan who goes seriously unhinged when his entire planet blows up. Some might say that he's a two-dimensional, stereotypical revenge villain. But what if I told you that Nero is actually one of the best Star Trek villains? Or at least the best kind of Star Trek villain. It seems like there's not much to Nero. He feels wronged, so he sets about to wanton destruction to fill his bottomless need for revenge. Now, revenge is a valid motive, right? It's not a bad one, but it is really cliché. Probably because it's so easy to write and easy to understand. But beside that, there is a lot more to a character than their motivations. Nero is not a uniquely deep or particularly interesting villain, but he's integral to a major theme of the film.
Emotions run deep within our race, in many ways more deeply than in humans. Logic offers a serenity humans seldom experience, the control of feelings, so that they do not control you.
Here, we've been set up for a nature versus nurture sort of theme. See, Prime Spock totally disassociated himself from his humanity.
Do you call yourself Terran or Vulcan?
Vulcan.
But the reboot is reminding us that Spock is half human, and he is susceptible to human failings, despite his pretending otherwise. But there's another interesting facet to Vulcans. Romulans. Romulans, for all intents and purposes, are Vulcans. Just Vulcans who have abandoned logic for passion. They are the ultimate symbol of the nature-nurture debate in Star Trek. They show how it's really not the Vulcans' physiology that makes them dispassionate and logical, it's their philosophy. Now, this theme was totally gutted in The Next Generation when Romulans were reimagined with physiological differences from Vulcans, but that's another topic for another day. So what does all this have to do with Nero? Well, Nero loses his wife and his entire planet. Who else loses a loved one and an entire planet? Oh yeah, Spock does. Nero is actually an anti-Spock, or rather, he is what Spock could become, or what any Vulcan could become. Nero chooses to respond to his pain with unbridled rage, and Spock dangerously flirts with this extreme as well.
I feel anger for the one who took Mother's life. An anger I cannot control.
Nero sits on his anger for 25 years in seething isolation. He behaves as though his hatred for Spock is all that drives him, what actualizes him to step up and to do something to save his wife and to save his planet. But in reality, his anger, and particularly his hatred for the one he holds responsible, cripples him, and it ultimately destroys him. Spock, on the other hand, who feels a similar uncontrollable anger, refuses to feed into it and to isolate himself. He springs right back into action, reclaiming his moral center, and relying on his shipmates, ultimately saving the day. Both Vulcans and Romulans are an endangered species in this film, and Nero and Spock are their respective representatives. They represent not only the timeless argument of nature versus nurture, but they also represent two different reactions to personal loss. They were both capable of choosing their own destinies, but Nero chose destruction and death, and Spock chose serenity and friendship. Nero isn't a bad villain at all. He's a dark and distorted mirror of Spock, and he's a springboard of important discussions of how genetics, life experience, and ultimately personal choice affect our so-called destinies.
You are fully capable of deciding your own destiny. The question you face is, which path will you choose?